Hello and welcome to the special edition of Big Picture. The election to the office of the Vice President is over and the results will be announced anytime soon. It is, however, a foregone conclusion that the sitting Vice President, Hamid Ansari, will be re-elected and he would only be the second Vice President in India's post-independent history to get a second term after Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. It is coincidental that both are non-politicians. The role of the Vice President in the constitutional scheme of things is not very significant, as he essentially plays the role of a second fiddle to the President, standing in for the President whenever needed, and in fact is known as President in waiting, who would automatically occupy the office of the President if a vacancy is caused in rare circumstances. However, individuals and their stature invariably elevate the status of the office also, like some of our Vice Presidents have displayed. It is, however, his other role as the chairman of the Rajya Sabha which is more in focus, as it is here that his authority as well as sagacity and wisdom comes to play. How innovative can a Vice President be in his role as the chairman of the Rajya Sabha? Will a second term for Hamid Ansari help in bringing him certain innovations in the functioning of the Rajya Sabha? What kind of reforms is needed to make its functioning better? We will discuss all this today during the next 1 hour while asking the question what we can expect from a second term Vice President. To discuss this, I have with me today Satyavrat Chaturvedi, Rajya Sabha MP and a Congress spokesman, and Bharat Bhushan, a senior journalist and a commentator. Before I go into this discussion, let us have a look at what Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, who is the returning officer for the Vice President's election, said just a few moments ago.
Dear friends, I welcome you all to this briefing. As you are aware, the process for election of the Vice President, Office of the Vice President of India was set in motion. Hello? 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 Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Friends, I welcome you to this briefing. As you are aware, the process for the election of the Office of the Vice President of India was set in motion by the issue of 2 notifications by the Election Commission on 6 July 2012. A public notice inviting nomination to fill up the Office of the Vice President was also issued simultaneously by me in my capacity as a returning officer for the Vice Presidential elections of 2012. Accordingly, nomination papers were received in my office from 6 July 2012 till 20th July 2012 between 11 hours and 15 hours except on public holidays. Till 15 hours on 20th July, the last date for receiving the nomination papers, 42 nomination papers and all were filed by 31 persons. Out of these, 4 nomination papers were summarily rejected under subsection 4 of section 5B of the Presidential and Vice Presidential Elections Act 1952, as they were not accompanied by a certified copy of the entry relating to the candidate in the electoral roll of his parliamentary constituency. The remaining 38 nomination papers were taken up for scrutiny by me in my room at 11 hours on 21st July 2012. 31 nomination papers were rejected as they did not meet one or more of requirements of the conditions laid down in the Presidential and Vice Presidential Elections Act 1952. 4 nomination papers filed for the candidature of Shri Hamid Ansari and 3 nomination papers filed for the candidature of Shri Jaswant Singh were accepted by me as validly filed. As per the election program, polling for electing the 14th Vice President of India was held from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. today in room number 63, Parliament House. Counting of the votes which were just taken up at 6 p.m. has just concluded. I would like to inform you that out of the total number of 787 eligible electors, 736 electors exercise the right to vote. 736 electors have exercised the right to vote. As you are aware, in a Vice President election, every valid ballot paper represents 1 vote. Out of the total number of 736 votes, 8 votes were held invalid by me and hence rejected. Out of the remaining 728 votes, Shri Jaswant Singh ji secured 238 first preference votes, and Shri Hamid Ansariji secured 490 first preference votes. The quota sufficient to secure the return of a candidate to the office of Vice President is 365. I have therefore declared Shri M. Hamid Ansari as duly elected to the office of the Vice President of India. The election was conducted in a free, fair, smooth and orderly manner, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the candidates and their authorized representatives for their valuable cooperation, which facilitated the smooth conduct of the election process. I would also like to convey my heartiest congratulations to Shri Hamid Ansari ji for the Vice President-elect. I also thank the media and others for giving us a wide good coverage. Thank you. One. We will be handing over this thing to the declaration to the Vice President-elect. You will be going there right now. No. No, I think that it will be in the President's Secretary. It's the President who will swear in. It's a different thing. We don't do that. I think tea is being served. I request you to enjoy your tea. Pardon? Invalid votes, they were identifiable marks there. There is under the election, these ballots have to be secret. So the marks are not very clear. It could be identifiable. So it could identify the voter. So they were held to be invalid. They are not very clear. The marks, it's not marked 1 or 2. Pardon? Pardon?
Yes, 787 eligible.
787. See, three voters. There are 2 vacancies in Lok Sabha, and one candidate. The election was set aside by the court, and it was a disputed election. So there is a court order. So 3 electors we did not have. So we had 342 from Lok Sabha and 245 from Rajya Sabha.
Okay, so that was the declaration of the election of Mr. Hamid Ansari as the Vice President of India, and this will be his 2nd term. Bharat, for anybody, it's been a very long time after Radhakrishnan, nobody got a 2nd term. The fact that Mr. Hamid Ansari got a 2nd term, there is certainly certain significance to it, and it also reflects the confidence of at least the ruling party in him, the ruling alliance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He clearly the ruling party feels comfortable with Mr. Ansari. That's and the second reason really is that after all he was being considered for president's post earlier. So if you were considering him for president, he was good enough to be president of India. How could you then not say he's not good enough for vice president? But if you look at the number of votes, last time Mr. Ansari had got only 455 votes. This time he's got 490, so 35 votes more. Rajma Heptullah at that time had got 233. Jaswant Singh has got 238, so he's also improved a bit. But it isn't as if there's been a sort of a landslide in favor of Mr. Ansari. It's along expected lines. And even if all the 8 invalid votes were of UPA, even then he would not have crossed the 500 mark, which Mr. Pawan Bansal was saying that we would easily cross.
So, Mr. Chaturvedi, 500, you couldn't cross 500? Any
I think the arithmetic, let me take the opportunity first on this television to congratulate Mr. Hamid Ansari for being re-elected to the prestigious post of...
A very rare thing which happened.
A very rare thing. I mean, only twice in the past 60 plus years has happened where a person has been 2nd time re-elected for vice presidentship. So, congratulations, sir, and he happens to be the chairman of my house.
Absolutely.
And I, being a member of Rajya Sabha, have had a very close interaction and close working relationship with him. And on personal front also, I think Mr. Ansari would have perhaps had some of these parties not decided to abstain from voting, perhaps he would have gone beyond 500.
Why do you think?
Now these are political
These
decisions.
abstentions, Bharat, these abstentions from voting in a vice president's election. What is the political message they would like to send across?
I don't think the political message is really to the vice president. The political
Not to the vice
message
president,
really is to the BJP.
Right.
These are potential allies of BJP. Biju Janata Dal, TDP, except RSP, of course. Now they are basically sending a signal to these people that we may not be with you. We don't necessarily support your candidature. So it's a signal to the BJP-led NDA rather than anything else. However, I think it's a completely wrong thing to do to use the vice presidential election, which is an indirect election where you are voting on behalf of the people of India, to abstain. I don't think abstaining makes any sense because abstaining sends a signal that both the candidates are not found good enough by these parties. Absolutely. But that's not the case. Absolutely. The case really is that they're playing politics in this election to send signals to their to people who thought they were on their side, because in the presidential election, after all, BJD's candidate was also supported by the BJP and NDA, and people thought maybe the number of their allies is going to increase in days to come. So I think it's to dissuade and to prevent BJP from thinking that this kind of thing was happening, that they have done this.
Okay, we can see some the visuals here. This is the residence of the Vice President of India. Very shortly, I think the Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, who was the returning officer of this election, will be landing here to give him the certificate declaring him elected as the Vice President of India. These are live visuals coming from the Vice President's house on Maulana Azad Road in the capital, New Delhi. We have another guest in the studio joining us right now, Arundhati Ghosh, a former diplomat. Welcome, Ms. Ghosh. So, Mr. Chaturvedi, we were discussing about these abstentions. These kind of political messages being sent by political parties on these kind of, occasions, do they really make any sense?
No, I think this has been used as a political instrument in the past on several other occasions. But I don't see any sense in using it for an election of Vice President of India, which is a totally non-political post.
As a congressman, as a spokesman of the Congress, as a congressman, you see the TDP and the BJD, who are potential allies of the NDA. They can never be allies of the Congress in any case.
They in the past were allies of the NDA. But then
they
disassociated from the NDA.
They can be future allies of the NDA also. But do you see this abstention as something which hurts the NDA, or would you not like to see any meaning in this?
See, in fact, NDA was expecting their support because of the fact that in the presidential election, the NDA had supported the candidate floated by BJD and AIADMK.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, this is a technical kind of a thing. In this particular election, they wanted to send a message back to NDA that you may have supported our candidate, but we have some differences, fundamental differences, and we cannot support your candidate. A BJP man, they cannot support. So that is the kind of message. I agree with what Bharat said just now. So it was more of a message to the BJP than to anyone else.
Right, but but this is not something which Congress or your allies in the UPA can celebrate about.
No, I mean, there's nothing to celebrate about it, because we think exercising your right to vote is a positive thing to do.
Absolutely.
Rather than abstaining.
51 MPs have abstained. It's not a small number, Bharat.
It's not a small number, and it's completely the wrong thing to do. These people need to be educated about this process. That here, it is not only your personal vote. It's a vote on behalf of the people you represent, the states you represent. What gives you the right to abstain in this election? You want to make political points? Come out clearly and make that political point. Naveen Patnaik hasn't said that I'm sending a signal to BJP or so on and so forth. You want these signals to be understood.
To be understood by the large.
And yet you do something which I think doesn't make sense in a democracy. It's not a positive thing to do.
Anyway, if I may add a word, I mean, they wanted to send a signal to BJP. Okay, fine. I mean, the positive way of doing was you come out and vote against their candidate.
Vote against.
One, and I mean, they had nothing, in fact, against the vice president candidate Hamid Ansari ji.
Nor do I think they have anything against Jaswant Singh, for instance.
Nothing in person, nothing in person. But I mean, if they at all wanted to send a signal, the more positive way, the more constructive way of doing it was to vote against that candidate and show their resentment.
Anyway, we'll leave this aside now that Ms. Arundhati Ghosh has joined us. Ms. Ghosh, we were discussing earlier, before you joined us, about somebody getting a second term as Vice President of India, whether it's Vice President or President. President has happened only once, and now it is only for the second time it's happening. So it reflects on, do you think it also reflects on the personality of the person who has got a second term, or do you see it as some kind of the politics playing itself out?
Can I enter two caveats?
Please.
The first being that I am going to be prejudiced because I've known Mr. Ansari as a friend for 30 years or 40 years.
That's exactly why you're here.
No, so I'm just admitting it that so, it will not be any
this caveat is well taken.
Yeah.
Yes.
The second thing is I'm not a politician and will never be. But if I might make a political comment as a taxpaying citizen of the country, I think any election by MPs is a political act.
Absolutely.
So whether there are the fine-tuning amongst the understandings of political parties and things, which obviously are a revelation for us, but an ordinary citizen would see that this is a political signal from the UPA having nominated him for a second term.
Absolutely.
From those who abstained, not only to the different parties in Parliament, but to their own constituencies. I mean, after all, it was a Muslim, Hamid is a Muslim, and Mr. Jaswant Singh is BJP. There are messages which are going all over the place. And if I might just say with due respect that signals are never overt, at least diplomatically. Signals are what they are signals. And I think that to a large extent, to answer your question directly, I'm extremely happy and proud that Mr. Ansari has been elected again. And I think it's to do with the fact that he's not just his past as a career as a diplomat and so forth, and an outstanding diplomat, but his scholarly attitude, his sense of dignity. If one reads his speeches, his speeches are there on his website.
The fact is that in his first term,
he has a
especially his speeches have been full of meaning, full of wisdom, and he has made certain points which were very essential. And coming from the office of the Vice President, obviously it has certain meaning. So coming to Mr. Chaturvedi, Ms. Ghosh made a point. This in politics, all signals, no signals are overt. They're all covert signals, and people are expected to pick it up.
They're all signals.
They're all signals. And she made no bones about the fact that Mr. Hamid Ansari is a Muslim and Jaswant Singh is from BJP. So when people are abstaining or taking a decision to vote, there are political signals there. Do you agree with that? Do you think these kind of political signals? Do you think these kind of decisions have impact on elections, on how political parties perform?
No, I partly agree with what she said, that this is a political act. And being a political act, of course, there are signals, and these signals have political connotations.
Right.
So therefore, I mean, it depends upon who wants to send signals to whom. So the message would change with the address of the signal. That is what I would say.
Anyway, we need to go into a short break now. We'll continue this discussion. We'll be back very soon. Please keep watching.
Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us Chairman of Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, Mr. Rahul Khullar,
with a 5% tariff increase, they will more than recover. Everybody has to learn that spectrum is a valuable resource. It has to be auctioned. It has a commercial value.
Watch State of the Economy with Rahul Kullar. Only on Rajya Sabha TV.
Hello and welcome to our special program, To The Point. Today we have with us a special guest, Mr. V. Narayan Swamy.
Our government will complete its full term. To keep the prices under control, it is a collective effort of the central government and state government. I do not accept the theory that has been propounded by BJP, that is policy paralysis.
Watch To The Point. Only on Rajya Sabha TV.
Whether you're an investor, a consumer, an entrepreneur, or just someone who wants to understand economic policy a little better.
I'm increasingly becoming a skeptic of Davos.
The government should actually issue inflation index bonds.
The governor had too many choices because liquidity was tight.
We need this budget to be making a real strong statement.
This is the show to watch. Catch Policy Watch every Saturday 10 p.m. on Rajya Sabha television.
Welcome back. We are discussing the election of Mr. Hamid Ansari for a second term as the Vice President of India and seeing what is that we can expect from him in his second term. We are now joined by another guest, Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, one of the new MPs in the Rajya Sabha and also a BJP spokesman. Welcome, Mr. Yadav. Bharat, we were discussing about signals and, political signals being sent. Mr. Chaturvedi thinks that, who is... My question to you, and this bothers all of us when we go to cover elections. How much of these kind of maneuvers really impact in the elections for any political party? When they take this stand, do they really get converted into votes?
Well, at least they influence the outlook of the voter, the mentality of the voter, and the way the voter views a particular political party. However, if we take the specific case of the Biju Janata Dal here and the Telugu Desam Party, the signal is not to the people of India, to the voters. The signal is to a particular political party and the kind of alliance it can form.
Okay, now that we have Mr. Bhupendra Yadav here, these abstentions, we are discussing the abstention, the 51 people who have abstained from voting, you know who they are, yes. These three political parties, except one RSP, the TDP and BJD were your allies in the past, future potential allies, but they seem to have abstained to send a signal. Everybody agrees here to send a signal to the BJP. How do you look at it?
Definitely, because the elections are not supported by as a candidate of any party, but definitely because it is election which may be giving a message to 2014 politics also. Because at the time of president election, when Janata Dal you supported to the presidential candidate Mr. Mukherjee, then there was a debate that whether the NDA was big or not, or what will be the future of NDA. This time the other partner AIDMK openly support to the candidate supported by the NDA, BJD and TDP also abstained from the election. So it's a message, but it will come in a reality after when...
How is the BJP taking this message? Do you see this as something which is not a good signal, and you're going to have problems in 2014, or
no, it's not a matter. It's depend upon that how my party will perform in 2014 and the next assembly election also coming. So how we will perform in the next assembly election also, and how we are able to get a support of the citizens of this country. So how we are able to convey our message to give an alternative government for UPA, it's depend upon them.
Anyway, we will leave that issue aside. We'll come back to the issue of the, somebody gets a second term as vice president. Ms. Ghosh, you've been a diplomat. How important is the role of a vice president and as a diplomat? he also represents the country, goes out. Do you see that? Do you see a second term vice president having more authority when he goes out? Do you think he'll be used more often by the government to send messages to the other countries in the world? Do you think his diplomatic experience will be used much better in this term?
I can't say what the government is thinking or not thinking, but certainly even in his first term, he has had some extraordinarily important visits. This may or may not be noticed by our
media in particular.
Yes, well, our media is very whimsical.
Yeah.
His visit to Turkey, for example,
right,
and the speeches he made there, they are, as a diplomat, a former Indian diplomat, it is his entire persona,
right,
which carries that much weight. He brings his entire diplomatic experience there. But his knowledge, I said that earlier as well, he was and is a scholar diplomat.
Right.
He's a scholar vice president. In the mold, I would dare say, of Radhakrishnan.
Right.
So I think that the government would do well to use him as such. Those are really his strengths. And foreigners, they respect that because they expect from India scholarship,
right,
dignity, sobriety, and so forth. So I think that, as I said, I don't know what government will or will not do. But if you remember, he used to write after retirement.
Very regularly.
He cannot write when you're in service.
Yes.
He used to write frequently on issues of not only international political interest, but internal interest as well. So I think people are aware.
He was the chairman of the Minorities Commission.
Also. And I did the Vice Chancellor of Aligarh.
Right.
So he's had a fairly full post-service thing. So I think that the international community, I mean the countries that he visits, does have a respect for a person like that. And I sincerely hope that the government will use his things, but his advice on international affairs much more.
The vice president in our constitutional scheme of things doesn't have much to do in the sense that there is no clear-cut role for him except being the president in waiting, or But his role as the chairman of the Rajya Sabha, of which both of you are members of the Rajya Sabha, you have seen him in the last 5 years. You have seen him longer. He's seeing him only for a short time, and now that you will have another 5 years to see him. He tried to bring about certain innovations in the functioning of the Rajya Sabha. Some of them did not work. Why do you think it did not work? Like, for instance, shifting the question hour, which was a very major attempt he made, but he finally had to bring it back.
See, as a vice president, I would say he carried out his responsibility with utmost dignity. And not only that, he carried out his entire responsibility.
I think, sorry, Mr. Chaturvedi, we'll come back to it. I think Mr. Jaswant Singh is addressing the media. Let us listen to him.
For taking the trouble to be here. The final count of this election is now over, and above everything else, I must express my great gratitude to the NDA, to the leadership of the BJP, and of course my two colleagues, Rudhi and Sana, who so assiduously and so diligently labored for the last so many days. I have more than satisfaction, I must express it, at the numbers that have finally emerged. And not only has the NDA stayed together, we have received more votes than the NDA had or could have had. I won't go into the figures. So that's a very reassuring sign of the total unification of the NDA, plus outside support to the NDA. Like, for example, and I'd like to mention it in particular, the Honorable Leader of the Anna DMK and the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, who so graciously received my colleague Rudy and I, and also very graciously endorsed my candidature and extended her support. I'm very grateful to her. As I said, I'm very grateful to the leadership of the NDA, all the parties that constitute it. I have just congratulated Shri Hamid Ansari, who continues to be the Vice President in his first term till the 10th, and thereafter he will be installed for a second term, for which he has all my good wishes, which I have extended to him. And I wish him a successful second term, for which, in any fashion, if I can extend support to him, I will do so. I do wish to say this, especially the manner, the dedication, and the continued diligence and hard work with which my colleague and the leader of the House in the Lok Sabha, Srimati Sushma Swaraj, managed and directed this entire campaign from the beginning till the end. Without her continuous and assiduous support, as indeed those of my two colleagues, Rajiv and Shana, I don't think these numbers would have been possible. I'm very satisfied with these numbers. Now we shall fight the next battle to victory.
You said that this election was somewhat predictable, but you said you are more than satisfactory with the result. As an NDA candidate, how many votes you have anticipated?
This arithmetic, I would leave to your intelligence and your ability rather than my going into the arithmetic of it. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you. मैं हिंदी में भी आपको यही बात कह देता हूँ. अभी जो वोट का गणित है वो पूर्ण रूप से सामने आया है और मुझे बहुत संतोष है कि उस गणित ने यह सिद्ध कर दिया है कि एनडीए बिल्कुल संयुक्त है और संयुक्त के साथ साथ एनडीए को दूसरे वोट भी मिले हैं. हमें उसमें किसी प्रकार की निराशा की जगह नहीं है, संतोष की जगह है. इसमें बहुत कुछ हमने हासिल किया है और आगे की भी हम हासिल रखेंगे. मैंने उनकी विजय पर श्री हमीद अंसारी साहब को बधाई दे दी है और वो 10 तारीख तक तो ऐसे वाइस प्रेसिडेंट हैं. उसके बाद जब वाइस प्रेसिडेंट बनेंगे उनको मैंने बधाई के साथ साथ आश्वासन भी दिया है कि मेरा सहयोग उनको सदैव रहेगा. एक बार पुनः मैं हमारी जो लोकसभा की नेता हैं श्रीमती सुषमा स्वराज और मेरे दो जो सहयोगी हैं, उन्होंने जितनी मेहनत से लगन से इस चुनाव में हमको ये नंबर हासिल करने में, और ये मैं सोचता हूँ विफलता नहीं है, सफलता है. इस सफलता को हासिल करने में उसके लिए मैं बहुत बहुत आभारी हूँ. आपका भी आभारी हूँ. इतनी देर रात आप यहाँ खड़े हैं. धन्यवाद. थैंक यू.
Okay, that was Mr. Jaswant Singh accepting his defeat very gracefully. Mr. Bharat, one thing about this vice president's election compared to the president's election was that there was a lot of dignity and grace to this election. There was none of those things which we witnessed during the vice president's election. That was, I think, we should give credit to Mr. Jaswant Singh for maintaining that grace and dignity during this campaign.
I think it's got to do with the personality of the two contenders. Both of them were extremely graceful, and also they didn't have to travel around too much. In the presidential election, you have to go to the states and you have to lobby, at least make courtesy calls, etc. I mean, in this case, of course, Mr. Jaswant Singh went to Tamil Nadu and met J. Jayalalitha. But it's got to do with the personality of these two people, and there are no contentious issues here. Okay, but the vice president doesn't play the same kind of role as the president plays, after an election and so on and so forth. His role really is that of chairman of the Rajya Sabha, besides being, president.
It's very interesting, Ms. Ghosh. Here were two contestants. One Diplomat, the other was the foreign affairs, external affairs minister. The diplomat wins.
I'd better not comment on that. But I think it must have been particularly galling because I heard Mr. Jaswant Singh say at one of his television interviews that we have worked together when I was minister and he was in the foreign service. Now that is evident to anybody who's interested in this election. But in this question of travel and so forth, the Vice President could not have travelled.
Could not have travelled.
Yes,
Absolutely.
so, I mean,
and there was no need to travel also probably.
Well, whether there was need or not, I think that this was left completely to the
political
UPA.
parties to manage
right.
the election. Anyway,
so I think that is something.
But in any
which
case,
does
I think we need to give credit to Mr. Jaswant Singh for having displayed extreme grace and
yes.
during this entire campaign. And anyway, coming back to you, Mr. Chaturvedi, we were talking of innovations which the Vice President or Chairman of Rajya Sabha, as Chairman of Rajya Sabha, he made during the last 5 years, tried to bring in innovations. It didn't work.
See, we have a committee on rules and regulations, and there is another committee, the PAC. Now, these committees are chaired by the chairman of the Rajya Sabha, that is the Vice President. In many of these committees, he emphatically wanted lots of changes, certain basic and fundamental changes.
Like what?
Which would bring about a quality debate and a quality presentation in the House, and would further enhance the dignity of the Parliament as such, and Rajya Sabha in particular.
Right.
But unfortunately, the nitty-gritties of politics, inter-party politics, they always come into play when these kinds of issues have to take a decision, or a decision has to be taken on these. I know to an extent whereafter, I mean, one would feel exhausted. He went even to that extent in bringing about some kind of a consensus. But it did not work.
But you know, this moving the question hour.
All I can pray God is now he has a second term. Let's see,
maybe he can try again.
He succeeds again.
This time. No, his decision to move the question hour from morning, which is normally it's from 11 to 12, to our post-lunch period was taken because the kind of, half the time the question hour never takes place because there's always
in the beginning hour of the, that is 11 onwards, when the question hour traditionally is carried out. I mean, lots of issues of whatever political importance or the public importance are concerned. Lots of parties and political parties, especially the opposition parties, they come up with one issue or the other and disrupt the question hour.
Yes.
Whereas he always emphasized the fact that question hour means putting an accountability to the executive,
absolutely,
the government, and which happens to be the fundamental right of the members of the House.
Right.
So he wanted that this accountability aspect should not be ignored.
And also the biggest weapon for an individual member.
Absolutely, it is through this mechanism that the people of India, through their elected representative, hold the government accountable.
Absolutely.
Now, and answerable. So he wanted the sanctity and practicality of this provision of our constitution to remain strong enough. So therefore he thought, if perhaps by changing the question hour from 11 to 12 to 2 to 3, if that would enable more questions to come in and more answers given, I mean, if that accountability could come into play. But somehow there were some practical problems which ultimately we had to revert back to the same old problems. The problems was that most of the questions or most of the issues that are discussed in the pre-lunch session are discussed primarily by many members present in the House. But post-lunch, most of the members have their own other political commitments.
Attendance was a major
and there was a very sleek attendance in the House, which in fact defeated the purpose of having the question hour.
Yes, Bharat.
Could it be that, you see, what happens if you have question hour in the morning, of course people are much more energetic, but when question hour is suspended, that's also a way of the House showing that some major important issue has come up in the nation, and the people's representatives are seized of it. So, often question hour would get suspended if there's a big issue. So that was also, I suppose, a factor that you want questions, of course, in the morning, but you also need to have the right to suspend question hour and take up.
It's not a question hour, Mr. Bhupendra. Yadav, you are a new
once
member.
in a while, if there is a disruption of question hour, it carries the weight as you said. I mean, it carries a message to the people that there is something very important. Whereby even the question hour had to be suspended. But if it becomes everyday affair,
it becomes a routine.
And that is what has happened.
But what happens when people don't turn up? People who have start questions, ask questions, they know their questions. They just
Bharat, that's another innovation which Mr. Hamid Ansari tried to bring in, wherein he made it, even if people who had asked the questions were not present, somebody else could ask the question.
Yes.
I think, Mr. Bhupendra, you are a new member. You have been observing this functioning of the House for a brief period, at least now about 6 months you have been there, I think, if not.
This was second session.
You have seen 2 sessions. Do you have any ideas, or do you feel as a new member when you sit there and observe these kind of disturbances which happen in the House, you must be feeling quite distressed?
No, I don't think so, because
or you think that these kind of disturbances are necessary?
Being a new member, last session was my first session.
Right.
But it was told by senior, or I saw in the proceeding also in the last session 2 private member resolution regarding the subordinate legislation.
Right.
First is on the IT rules and second on the airport authority rules. And I think being a new member, the question hour is very important for the new member. He can raise his own question. But apart from question hour, there are the parliamentary committees, standing committee, the other committees are working. These committees are working very seriously for the purpose of law making, or for the purpose of the accountability and transparency of the government is concerned. But as Satyavrat ji rightly said, that it is a business advisory committee. Business advisory committee, being the member of all political party, they will decide the business of the house, and sometime who will lead the house, who is the chairman of the house.
The problem is not deciding the business of the house. The problem is how much business gets transacted finally. Yes.
We've got all these eminent politicians here. It cannot be the case that only Mr. Ansari feels, and clearly you, that the executive must be held accountable. Other MPs must also feel it. So if they feel that question hour is not necessary and all your committees will deal with this, then scrap question hour.
I'm not saying that question hour is not important. No, ma'am, I'm very sorry, I interrupt you. I'm not saying that question hour is not important. What I am submitted is question hour is important, and I'm speaking about the whole work of this house. Apart from
we're talking about a particular innovation, isn't it?
Innovation, it is the problem which is stated by Mr. Chaturvedi regarding that the practical problem, the problems of the attendance, the problem of the other committee work is going on. That is the problem that was decided by the business advisory committee of the house. But question hour is important. I am not saying it is not. It is very important.
Absolutely.
But it's never held.
Let me have experience of the state assembly also.
Right. You have been in the Madhya Pradesh assembly.
I mean, even in the state assemblies, we saw disruptions of question hour, but once in a while. And that would be accepted by almost all.
Yes.
Okay, fine. It's a very serious issue. Something has happened. Some big thing has happened around in the state, and we need to focus on that rather than going into question hour. We can take up the question hour every other day. Okay. But here in Parliament, what I realized was that most of the time, the question, so was the case in Lok Sabha, so is the case. I was a member of the Lok Sabha also. Right. So I have the experience of Lok Sabha and Raj Sabha both. In either of the house, every day on one pretext or the other, and most of these times, I realized that the pretext taken to disrupt the question hour was absolutely unnecessary.
Mr. Chaturvedi, my
there
question
were many more valuable questions that could have come up, and the government could have answered and could have been held responsible
and been in trouble, in fact. Answering this kind of... Anyway, my question is, how much role can the chairman of the Raj Sabha play in controlling this kind of tendencies? How much leeway does he have?
See, he has authority, definitely, but in a democratic system, everybody has to take care of the consensus. The consensus, he can initiate the process to bring about a consensus. because the rules are framed by not one individual, but by a collective wisdom of a committee. So this has to be, a consensus has to be built. Chairman, very well, with all the best of intentions, can initiate the process, can bring about all others and call for their wisdom to enact or to make rules, so much so that chairman at times could personally appeal to the people, and he does. He does.
No, he does.
But then it has to work.
Bharat, you indirectly answered my question. There are a large number of MPs don't wish to hold the government accountable.
I don't know. I mean, Bharat, but that would, Mr. Ghosh, I think that would be an extreme view.
Excuse me, he's just agreed with me.
I would not refute what she's saying. Number of MPs have political agenda over and above holding the government accountable on a given public interest issue. The political issue becomes more important than the public issue.
When a politician, when a member of parliament makes this kind of admissions, that
it does happen. We see it almost every day.
The MPs, but this is not, Mr. Chaturvedi. You should realize that what Ms. Ghosh was talking about is not just about the opposition parties. When you talk about a questionnaire, it's also the ruling party members who has to hold the government responsible. They also have a number of questions to ask to the government. When these kind of disruptions takes place, it is not, you can't just blame the opposition. The government also should be held responsible for it.
When the questionnaire is disrupted, who disrupts? It's never from the treasury.
That's fine, but that's fine.
It's always
but
the
why does it happen?
It's always the opposition which comes up with one issue or the other and disrupts the questionnaire.
Whenever there is this, I'll come to you. Whenever these kind of disruptions happen in the House, whenever there are problems, we have seen the chairman of the House is completely helpless sometimes because there's so much of, and any number of times we have heard this, that there is a certain agreement which happens inside in the chambers between the government and the opposition members, and those agreements get broken on the floor of the House, and the chairman is left helpless because he would have thought that this is the agreement, this is how the House will function, and then they find themselves in complete. So what I'm trying to ask is, when he says that this kind of, every time when there's a disruption, the government is also blamed by opposition for not being responsive to their demands.
Yeah. The thing is that democracy works on compromise, on cooperation and on consensus, and adhering to that consensus. And the stature of the chairman of the House matters. The kind of links he has with the floor managers of various parties, with political leaders. Do they listen to him? Do they not listen to him? Do they think he's a heavyweight? Do they think he's a lightweight and can be pushed around? All these things come together at times like these. So there have been chairmen who would appeal, and their appeal would be listened to by those who are disrupting. And there have been people who know that there's going to be a disruption. Now, since you're being very honest, there was a chairman, who I will not like to name him, who used to tell the opposition that, you must raise this issue, it's very important, and, I'll see to it the House is not adjourned. And would also tell the ruling party's whips and floor managers that I will adjourn the House if something like this happens. So what he did not know was that these two people were talking to each other, they were good friends, and they knew what the chairman had to do.
Okay. My question now, in the light of what you said, Bharat, is getting a second term as vice president. Obviously, his stature will also improve, and his confidence will also go up. Do you think he will be able to handle this House and bring in certain changes which he had envisaged during his first term? And do you think he will get better cooperation this time than what he had last time?
He'll have to work at it. It won't come automatically. Getting a second term may give you confidence, but may also have the danger of making you cynical about politics. So he'll really have to solicit the cooperation of the opposition. I think he lost the cooperation of the opposition on the day of the Jan Lokpal bill, when he refused Lokpal bill, when he refused to extend an already extended winter session of Parliament. Had he taken these people into confidence, had he developed consensus on whether there was going to be voting or why voting was not possible. Voting was not possible to my mind because people were introducing amendments which they had already introduced.
There were hundreds of amendments.
But some of those amendments, those parties had an opportunity to introduce them in Lok Sabha. They had done it. Some of them had been accepted. So they were also trying to, they didn't want the bill to be passed. However, if an attempt had been made, I don't know how successful it would have been, to build consensus about whether the House should be adjourned at midnight, or should it go until 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning or throughout the night, etc. He would have the confidence of the opposition. I think he lost that confidence that day of the opposition, and he has to regain that.
You think he will regain, Mr. Bhupendra?
I am agree with Mr. Bharatji. On 29 December, that was the date. It was.
Will he be able to regain the confidence of the opposition now that he has got a second term?
We hope so, because ultimately he is our elected vice president. We hope so, and we wish that it will be happen and House will run smoothly. And Satyavrat is very senior member for us, but always question our disturbed by the opposition. It is not. Last time it was happened by Telangana issue by the Congress in Lok Sabha. I am not questioning that, but it is happened by both. But one thing I want to say, that question hour is a right of a member. It is a very important right, and it must be continued, because it is a session where we make a government accountable.
Mr. Chaturvedi, another issue as far as the functioning of the not just Rajya Sabha, both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha is concerned, is the number of days it sits, and because of which, and whatever little number of days it sits, there are a lot of adjournments and a lot of time is lost. There have been demands in this country, and there have been repeatedly, many people are talking about it, that at least 100 days a year the parliament should meet. Do you think this is something which is a practical idea?
See, as far as I'm concerned, I can express.
And do you think Mr. Hamid Ansari has been able to put this across, and has he been able to, you think this has come into the discussion at any point of time?
See, all the speakers of the assemblies or legislatures of this country meet time and again.
Right.
And they
have an annual speakers meeting.
Yes. So they have a conference where they discuss all these problems that do hamper and do affect the functioning of the legislatures. So this was, on repeated occasions, one of the most important issues taken up.
It is there in every year. It's on the agenda.
And the resolution passed.
Yes.
Now, it is ultimately the executive, the government. So be it government here or be it government in the states, I mean, somehow this has not been able to come into play. We haven't been able to have enough sittings. Sittings have gradually reduced over the years and decades, and today I think they're at the lowest ebb.
Ms. Ghosh, one of the problems of these short parliament sessions which we are having is, major areas like foreign affairs, instance, hardly get discussed in even security issues. Foreign, yes.
But yes, I agree. But also, I'd like to bring in that whatever your committees do, and I'm sure they're doing a lot of hard work, the people don't know that. What the people know is what we see on television or read in the newspapers.
Right.
What we are seeing is all this tumult, not holding the government accountable, the entire lot. So then you have civil society or whoever bringing the entire thing into question, and why they get a response, because that's what they're seeing on television.
Absolutely.
For those of us who continue to be interested in national security issues or in international relations or whatever, it is something which is, I think, a tragedy that we have a parliament, we elect our representatives there, and they don't care to discuss.
Okay.
Unless it is controversial in terms of Pakistan.
Anyway, Ms. Ghosh, we have completely run out of time. That was a very interesting discussion. Mr. Hamid Ansari, in his second term as the Vice President, and more importantly, as the Chairman of the Rajya Sabha, has a task cut out for him as far as this role as the Chairman of Rajya Sabha is concerned. He will face many challenges, and we hope that some of the innovations that he has tried in his first term, he will be able to implement them, and as Mr. Chaturvedi said, he will be more successful in pushing those reforms through. Thanks to all my guests. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, Ms. Arundhati Ghosh, Mr. Satyavrat Chaturvedi, and Bharat Bhushan. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture tomorrow at the same time.